I want to welcome you to the Monday night study when we're making an important shift here. We're moving now from the study of the book of Ephesians, and we've spent about 27 sessions on that. And we're now going to be moving into a pickup from where we left off on my Sunday morning studies, but I'm transferring it to the Monday night. So I'm going to kind of give you an overview of where we've been. It's on the theme of wisdom. And we're just going to be picking that up, and the archive will be in the Sunday morning. And let me explain what I mean by that, just so you can see where we are. So go to kenboa.org, and then on the weekly studies, then you see the Sunday morning study there. And this is the archive of the Wisdom series that began a good while ago. It began really on this series right here. So it was there. And that was in June 5th of 2020. So we've been at it for a good while. And this was the series on wisdom. And so we're dealing with the Lordship of Christ, cultivating an eternal value system. So you can find all these things and then summon them up. So for example, part 3 was really the first time we started looking at the book of Proverbs. Welcome to the first live Zoom Christchurch Sunday morning class. And I would like to kind of give you, so that you can see what I had my beard then. And it just moves on to the source of wisdom, a life. What is a life well lived? A choice of two paths, the wisdom of repetition. And of course, with each one of these, just remember, you want more detail here. And the actual 1 page or so description is found there as well. So just so you remember that as well, because it's a good backup for you could where you could see more of these series. So that's where we are. So that on the Monday night, then if we go to weekly studies, then the Monday night, well, we're going to be picking up now. We did walk like a child of God, and we in our archive then resisting the devil. So it was a 27-part series of the book of Ephesians. And so if we go right here, we get to see what all that was about. But now our switch is going to be over, as I say, to the wisdom literature. And that is now summarized in another way if we go to the website. And that is to say that we have the spring retreat, Living with Wisdom in a World That's Lost It. Well, that's what we're going to be discussing tonight and moving more into this. But this particular retreat we're doing at the Cove on May 14 to 16, and you can just go right there to the homepage of the website and sign up. It's going to be a beautiful location and 3-day, 2-night retreat for both men and women in this locale. We're taking over the whole place. And so you can see the themes here. First of all, there's an introduction to wisdom. And this is precisely what we're going to be summarizing and working on in this series. This at the Cove, however, is going to be a one-off presentation for each one of these components. So just a one-part summary of each of these are like little mini-series. So the introduction, how does the Bible define wisdom and how do we attain it? And I'm going to give you a little summary of that tonight. An overview of Proverbs, life-transforming principles. And again, I'm going to be doing that because we've already done that in my Sunday morning. So we're going to be picking up from there. Then third, an overview of Job. And that's where we were before. So we're going to bring you up to where we were. Learning the secret, and this is a key, the secret of obeying the one we cannot understand. Now, that's an incredibly important theme to remember. The secret, because we really keep on asking why, because we want answers. And we have to finally come to the point where we admit we do not have the answers. And that even if God were to tell us, we couldn't comprehend it. It would only add yet another, well, why is that true? And why is that? And it'd be an infinite regress, effectively meaning that we can't even understand the fringe of his ways in any of his created order. Not anything. If you further analyze it, it takes you into the realm of mystery every time. Any aspect would do. A leaf would be enough, a galaxy. Any of these things are filled with mysteries. And the point I'm suggesting here is that if we can't understand the visible world, and the more we know in science, the more astonishing it becomes, not the less, the more profound and mysterious it becomes, then how would it be if we asked him about the spiritual realm? And the answer is no. So we come to the point where we stop pushing and promoting ourselves and trying to understand and demanding what we can never attain. But rather, the wisdom is trusting him enough to obey what he calls us to do. And we discover that that is where we find our secret rest, our security. And then we will be talking about the wisdom psalms, learning the wisdom of treating things according to their true value. And that's where we're going to be going. So this is a summary of this study as well, but in a great more depth than, of course, that we're going to be doing at the Cove. An overview of the book of Ecclesiastes is also part of the wisdom series. And that's the process. How do you transform futility into a living hope? So that the whole idea, can we do more than maximize pleasure and minimize pain, is what we're suggesting here. Michael Stewart, my associate, is going to be doing a session on an overview of wisdom in the New Testament, what he's calling the foolishness of God and the cross of Christ. And it's an interesting angle to take, where he's looking at the wisdom which is mysterious and manifold, and what therefore its otherness, as he says, appears as foolishness to this dying world. And then finally, the last session in this 7-part series is going to be living a life of truth, goodness, and beauty. And we're created and redeemed to glorify God as living incarnations of his wisdom. So what does that look like? As we're saying, how do we live in a world that elevates the autonomous self, that results in chaos and absurdity? We're called to be countercultural agents of grace, living the life of the age to come in the present age. We also have Glenn Sunshine, who's going to be with us. He'll be doing a special series on one session on what they get right and what they get wrong on the critical theory and so forth like that, just because we do need to be wise enough to understand the times and then to know what we ought to do. So to give that to that perspective, then, that's really this series in a nutshell of what we are doing. And where we started then was clearly an introduction to wisdom. And the way I started that was to use, and I'm just going to give you a very, very brief overview, but if you want more detail, you can certainly find it then in those archives, very easily found. But what I'm using here is my conform to his image. And so this is the revised edition here of conform to his image. And it deals with a number of specific facets of the spiritual life. And one of those facets is actually holistic spirituality, every component of life under the lordship of Christ. And that brings us to the centrality of Christ, you see, and this becomes the major theme there. So if we look at it from that standpoint, then we go in there and then jump ahead here and find that right passage here, the right place here. So we go to the centrality of Christ here. See, this is disciplined spirituality here, and I think it's right here. Yes, we were talking about a whole series on wisdom and what that means, and then I tie the threads together in that chapter with 8 questions. And again, this is just the essence, the distilled essence. First of all, what is wisdom? And we see that wisdom is a skill, and that's the key word for it, chokhmah. It means skill. Living a life with every area under the dominion of God. So that would be a key definition that would say using the best means at the best time to accomplish the best ends. And it's a key to a life of beauty, fulfillment, and purpose. And who doesn't want a life like that? So we find, though, we're living, as I say, in a world that has lost it. So how can we be agents then of the wonderful wisdom of the living God and manifestations of that purpose? And so the obvious question then is, how do we pursue wisdom? And again, this is a summary of what I discussed in that chapter. But it rests in God's hands. It comes from above. And so the conditions for attaining wisdom, because it's a wisdom that comes from above then, are really this understanding that the wisdom that from below that we're often in this world accustomed to is so radically different from a higher form of wisdom, which interestingly enough looks like foolishness to the world. So that a person who just treats the temporal as all there is and lives according to what they see and what is now will not have any kind of appetite for the things of what is not seen and what is not yet, and will treat the temporal as if it's eternal and the eternal as if it were something that could just be arbitrarily considered, but maybe postponed for a later time in life. And that is a life of folly. Whereas the wisdom from above, as we see in James 3, is pure and peaceable, and it has qualities of the good fruits that God provides. So then the conditions then how do you attain it? And the question is, what does that mean? In Proverbs, and we discover again and again that true wisdom is gained by cultivating the fear of the Lord. That's the foundation. And then the question is, what is the fear of the Lord? I call it an attitude of awe and humility, but it's even more in some respects. There's a whole spectrum of that. But you acknowledge your creaturehood, and you then recognize that you have to see and learn the wisdom of treasuring the unseen over the seen. And so the only way we can do that is to be cultivating that by faith, you see. We have to reject one system and embrace the other. Well, how do you grow in faith? And you have to trust God, and it's related to your knowledge of God. And so how do you increase in your knowledge of God? And we talked about having a relationship with Him. So this is one of the themes that we develop a good deal here. And as I've often shown you, this little scheme from John chapter 15 summarizes it in certain ways pretty well, because if we consider going backwards here, we realize what the key to the glorifying the Father is to bear fruit. And that is the way you bear fruit is to abide in Christ. You don't create fruit, you receive it as a vine, as a branch in the vine, and let that you be our conduit. And then the fruit's at the end of the branch. Well, what's the key to abiding? Obedience is the key to abiding in Christ. And it's a modality of apprehension of God. And the key to obeying Him is to trust Him enough to obey Him. But that requires you to love Him. Because if you can love Him, then you can trust Him. But the key to loving Him is knowing Him. But that's not just a knowledge that's just intellectual, but it is a personal, it's a relational knowledge. And there's a mutuality. They both feed each other. It's an up and down system that we can see here. So those are just a few thoughts about this theme then of what wisdom looks like then, how we grow in faith. And so that's an important motif. So going back from that then, we were then talking about an overview of Proverbs. And again, you can go back to those and drill down on that series, because we went through Proverbs and covered quite a few sessions in doing so. And what I was using there was this practical wisdom of Proverbs, which is now found. I was using these notes, but we've now added these notes, an edited version of them, to the website on Proverbs. So as I understand it, that's now fully available on the website, and I think it is in the library under the area of it might be Old Testament here, and the embracing the theology of wisdom and so forth. You'll find that there, but we've added those kinds of entries there. So the practical wisdom of Proverbs is not to go into much detail, but the idea is more than just intellectual. It's a moral acumen. It's a moral capacity. The wise man learns from the mistakes of others. Nobody lives long enough to make them all himself, it's been said. There's a lot of wisdom in that. So the whole concept then is that I'm just pulling out a few important points to get as a kind of little sampler for you if you want more detail. But every happening, great and small, is a parable whereby God speaks to us, and the art of life is to get the message. But then for some people, they can have 30 years of experience, and they've just repeated 30 times over. So only experience that's applied will actually be of value to us. And that's the practicality of the wisdom of Proverbs. And the point that I stress in that book and in life itself is that the school of failure can be actually quite a powerful tool. It can move us in the direction of wisdom if indeed we evaluate the mistakes that we've made, instead of repeating them over and over again. So we gain from that perspective if we're careful. So then we talked a good deal about the timeless nature of the Proverbs, and a wide array of things there. Some of the key verses, and one of those key verses that we looked at was in fact Proverbs chapter 3 and verses 5 to 7, because here, if you want the distilled essence of the wisdom literature in terms of what that would look like, these little verses are pretty close to what that's like. To trust in the Lord. And what does that mean? You can unpack that, but to trust in the Lord, how? Well, with all your heart. And so in one sense, then, it's all your being, not just a part of it. So the way I put it here, when I describe it that way, is in Proverbs 3, with all your heart means to trust Him entirely. And then we go back And he goes on to say, and do not lean on your own understanding. So there's an exclusion there. And so that means is that you also trust in him exclusively, you see. And then he goes on to say further, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. So there we have the third component, and that is in all your ways is extensively. So this gem tells us effectively that if we entrust him entirely, exclusively, and extensively, that is to say, with all our heart, don't lean on our understanding, acknowledge him in all your ways, not just things that you think you're good with or not so good, but all aspects matter. Then he goes on to say he will make your paths straight. And then he adds this wisdom. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Instead, he says, fear the Lord and turn away from evil. So again, the key of fearing the Lord becomes a motif, a key, a driving, guiding, powerful motif in the book of Proverbs. So these are just a few thoughts. I'm just going to sum up just a few other little things and go from here, things I marked particularly. A proverb is a simple illustration that exposes a fundamental reality about life. They're pithy, they're insightful. And what's fascinating, it takes 9 chapters in order for us to actually go through the book of Proverbs. It's intriguing to me that the book of Proverbs then really requires these 9 chapters. So if we look here, then the first portion here is really a prologue here and brings us up to here. But the principles don't really happen until chapter 10, verse 1. So the real Proverbs really begin at chapter 10. And so when we see what that looks like then, it means that this entire book then is these entire 9 chapters are designed to create a hunger and a thirst for this kind of righteousness, for an understanding of what life is like and what it's meant to be. The most important skill, as we saw, of living is every area of your life under the wisdom of the dominion of the living God. And wisdom's uneven, so it takes decades. And then you realize, wow, you may have wisdom in one area, but you have folly in another, and then you have to make these mid-course corrections. But I define this theme of the fear of God as a reverential awe for God's majesty, a sense of radical dependence upon him. And that's the foundation upon which the skill of living life under his dominion is built. So if we say the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, that's really what it can be teased out to mean. Reverential awe, radical dependence, the realization that all things come from him. And that knowledge is the key to really living all aspects under his dominion and under his authority. So this becomes then a whole theme. And then one of the themes that I love in this book is that it's transgenerational, and it's through modeling, both formal and informal sessions. They had this wisdom that I fear is being lost in our own time because people now see in the wisdom that we need to have a transmission from generation to generation, but that's being diminished because of the intergenerational disconnect. Talk about the various aspects of, by contrast, the foolish and so forth, and the various topics. Because when you finally get to the topics, when you get to chapter 10 and following, they're not organized in a particular category, so you have to break them down topically. What about the wise person's speech, what about skills in listening? What are wisdom's psalms? On Proverbs, rather, on relationships. How do you use your money? Just the book of Proverbs on money alone is life transforming if applied. The principles of marriage, of children, and the character of the wise person. And the emphasis of this whole book then is nothing in the world at all can never compare with attaining a heart of wisdom. There's nothing that can be attained. One of the things that I have stressed again and again is that you either judge the scriptures according to your culture, or you'll judge your culture according to scripture. So either the word will help you understand the world, or the world will force you to try to show you what the word is like from its point of view. But your question is, what is your authority? So the interesting thing is the world will certainly not give us those things. The world is inimical to the word. But yet the word is God's blueprint for success, true success in living life. The night of my true conversion to Jesus is when that metaphor just enveloped me. and the realization, this book, this Bible that I had learned some verses in as a kid, then I finally realized this thing is actually alive and active. It is his blueprint. I've got to learn what it means. And so I went to seminary, not so much to get an education or training in the sense of application, but just to get my head together. What does this book teach us? And the power of this book is so practical that it tells us about the details of life in a way that we could hardly begin to imagine. We discover the qualities of the wise, of humility, and a sense of dependence upon the living God, of people who are loyal and teachable, who are righteous people, who have a quality of character, moral character, that they are companions of wise people, but they also are concerned about the needs of the poor and the needy around them. So there is this whole idea then of the need for seeing righteousness in relationships to those who are in need as well. And it's inimical to the kinds of mindsets that sometimes happen or associated with this kind of individualism of the Western mindset, right? And then, or the opposite extreme, and sometimes is the kind of communalism almost. It's a collectivism. And the real solution is really to see the best of both, that you are a person who has dignity, but you are interdependent, not independent on the one hand or codependent on the other. You're interdependent. And then it goes on from there, and we look at the Proverbs and the power of the words, the power of words, the power of our speech and our relationships, and recognizing again what wisdom is and what it looks like, hard-earned wisdom. And so one of the principles of this book is, in fact, to learn and live, and not merely to live and learn. Now, you're going to have to do the school of living and learning. There's no one avoids those things. But why not be smart enough also, though, to at least gain the hard-earned collective wisdom of those who paid a dear price to gain that wisdom, and learn and live, so that you hear in advance rather than reinvent the wheel every time. And again, that's the whole idea of being an apprentice in the school of wisdom and learning it in that manner. But at the end of the day, though, there's a practicality and a realism that tells us again that this takes decades for this to reach the point of where one might be a sage and who continues to transmit it to the next generation. So all the practical areas of life, wealth and so forth, are all introduced and discussed in the book of Proverbs, and the various kinds of fools that one might encounter as well. So those were just a few of the thoughts that we had concerning the Proverbs. Again, there's an overview that I gave you that you can have by going back to the actual series themselves. And then in our series, then, going back to this, we looked at the book of Job, and let me see if I can get you. So in this book here, let's go to here. So having described in our first portion then, in the archives, an introduction to wisdom, and then we did an overview of Proverbs, and then we did an overview of Job, but we weren't through, and that's where we are leaving off here, and then we're going to pick up this series with that. And so where we got to in the book of Job then, as we see the overview, where you have Job's despair and his lack of understanding of what was going on, we get to see the prologue and see behind the scenes. We also get to see the epilogue. And the cycles of debate that occupy the bulk of the book then really have to do with human misunderstanding in this dialogue that just generates more and more heat and less light as it continues on. But in the book of Job then, what we see here is the idea of God's intervention and his intervening and revealing what we really needed to know all along. When we can see an outline of Job here, if I can find it for you here. The concept of the book is, if I can't find my outline of Job, but I'll find it this way. Just a moment, and we'll get it. So we have the Job outline there. So if we see the dilemma of Job, this is from my book, Talk Through the Bible, the circumstances. So you have Satan's first assault in chapter 1, and then his second assault in chapter 2. His friends arrive, and indeed, they truly are his friends. They come and for 7 days commiserate him and grieve with him, and they are silent. So do not forget that part. It's only after that 7 days when Job begins and speaks after that long time, when he breaks the silence and really then curses the day of his birth, that the first debate begins. And what takes place is that Eliphaz gives a speech, and he believes that the innocent don't suffer, but he comes up with these bromides and platitudes that even today are being used. So that this wisdom literature tells us it's deeper than just the human answers that we will just come up with as, oh, this is because of that. And so then Job replies, and really what you have is Job's replies are longer than the actual his interlocutors. But then you have his response to Bildad, and then Zophar's first speech. And then there's a second cycle of debate. And then this third cycle, and only 2 of them are in that one. And then Job's final defense, it's a monologue that he goes into. He affirms his righteousness. And unfortunately, because he's been defending himself from the accusations of his friends, who effectively are claiming that it must be because of some sin that Job has committed that he's suffering this, because God will reward the righteous. But it's, again, a simplistic notion. It's not that simple. But effectively, Job begins to move from being righteous to being somewhat self-righteous, and that becomes a problem. His second monologue, he remembers his extraordinary past, and now he just pleads with God. He says, if I could only defend myself. In other words, you're not fair to me. But then, before God intervenes, there is a 5-chapter section with the solution of Elihu, which does provide a good deal more insight than do the friends. But even there, though, it's God himself who has to actually break the debate and overcome Job's objections. And how does he overcome them? He doesn't ask him one question about the issues of why Job is suffering. Not once. He basically speaks to Job about his own glorious creation. And he speaks to him from the realm of the inanimate and the animate. And he then, in chapter 40, then Job gives his first answer to God. And we can see that he says, I'm inadequate, so I cannot answer you. But that's not exactly what's being looked for, you see. So we see, what can I say? So after God speaks about his creation, and the point is that Job can't answer any of these things. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the world? And all of these things are unanswerable questions. And he's trying to show Job that just look at the created order, and you cannot understand the fringe of my ways. Now, Job does respond and admits that he was wrong to actually arrogate himself against God. But he says, I've laid my hand on my mouth. Once I've spoken, I will not answer. In other words, I didn't know what I was talking about. And yet that's not the response that God's looking for in Job. So he gives him another series of questions, this time about his creatures that he's able to make and his power over them, and the impossibility of controlling them. The one who made them with great power and glory. And I think somehow Job gets a realization of God's greatness in this context. And it is God himself then who ends the debate, not with a proposition, but with his person. And somehow Job gets a picture of God that he didn't have before. And his response this time is really what is truly appropriate. He says, I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. And then he quotes this God's question of Job to Job, who is this who hides counsel without knowledge? So he then admits, I've declared that which I did not understand. Remember what we said with Job, it is learning the secret of obeying the one you cannot understand. That's the key. When he finally admits that, I can't understand it. It was things too wonderful, which I did not know. In other words, he says, I now realize it was arrogant of me to suppose I could bring God down to the bar of my own reasoning, as if he were in the dock and I'm asking him the question. No, you're the one who's being examined. And Job, you're the one who will never understand the fringe of my ways. But at the same time, you're the one who actually loves me. I'm the one who loves you. I'm the one who pursues you. And so I can give you this revelation. So he conveys himself. And so he responds, and I love this because he then says, therefore I retract, I repent in dust and ashes. And it's just this point of repentance then, where Job then finally is admitting then the error and the blunder of his ways. Now, another way of looking at this then is to see it from this standpoint here, because I then began, after looking at Job 38 to 42, God's response to Job, I began to think about more and more, it's my background as a scientist, to be thinking about the scientific realm and the realm of the macrocosm and the midicosm and the microcosm, the macrocosm in its greatness and its inconceivable magnitude, inconceivable. It's terrifyingly large, and yet it's also boundlessly small beyond our capacity to even think or imagine. It's so glorious and grand. The spectrum is astonishing. And so what I was doing here was saying, let's leverage the wonders of the visible realm, which is the general revelation of God. So when it's seen in this way then here, we realize that God's general revelation is his infinite word. And then we can understand about his special revelation, which is inspired word, incarnate and indwelling word. In other words, what we now know is far, far greater than what they knew then. So I say we do well to utilize our vastly greater knowledge of the creation than was possessed by the biblical writers. So I'm suggesting now that we know far, far, far more of any of these areas, from the macroscopic to the microscopic. Wouldn't it be wise to take that new scientific knowledge, much of it, in fact, within the last 100 years, especially, just going up exponentially, and the more we learn, the more astonishing it becomes, because we now know enough to ask questions we didn't know enough to ask, and so everything we then see is even more amazing than what we saw before. And so I'm suggesting here, let's do this doxologically. So just as the Lord described the wonders of his creation in Job 38 to 42, that's what we've been looking at here. I'm saying now, we can now point to the splendors in the macrocosm, the midicosm, which is the 12-mile thick biosphere, this thin membrane that is spherical around the earth, that contains all of life, and then the microcosm. And these things were unknown in those times. And so I used a number of videos, and which I won't repeat here because you can see them and go back to those videos there. But I use one as the scale of the universe video to really give you a perspective on this, the vastness and how little we know. Then we looked inside the inner life of a cell. And when you begin to look in cell biology, it is utterly astonishing that there's no way to grasp how these things are working. They're more complex. Any cell more complex than a human city in all respects, and filled with mysteries and wonders. And the more we learn about them, the more astonishing they become. And then from there, I did some videos, for example, looking at flowers like a dandelion, my own study of my Malaysian orchid. And then there's a terrific video from the Discovery Institute. And by the way, I recommend for your consideration then some videos for you to look at on your own. And one of those is the John 1010 Project. And you'll find that on YouTube. And they have a channel. So you can go to that and find that. Another one that you'd like would be the Discovery Institute. And again, there's some very excellent videos there that summarize things very nicely. And so then I have some other sources of videos, and looking at fish, at beautiful jellyfish and corals and so forth. And the more you come to see it, the more astonishing it becomes. And then we got up to living machine video, and that's where I have Monday night here, because that's where we're going to pick up in our next time. And I'm going to pick up with that and just show you some more of these videos here, just to stretch your imagination. My desire here being a very simple one, to impress you with God, and in ways that we didn't even know were even possible. So is it possible for us to use science in a redemptive manner, in the sense that we can now take that and leverage it in a doxological way? So there are so many scientists who come to love the natural beauty in their discipline, in their field, whatever it might happen to be. My desire is for us to see that beauty points to the mind of the maker of that beauty. And that when we see that elegance and gratuitous beauty that's in the natural world, that it should be used doxologically to the glory of God. It points beyond and declares his glory. And so now that we know so much more than they did then, it's quite remarkable. So I'm going to be looking at some more things like the super Starling video, birds of paradise, the McGregor bowerbird, the lyrebird, even beautiful chickens. It's hard to find it, to believe, but it's just the creation's filled with surprises. It really is. I'll show you some, just again on different scales, some landscapes that again are evocative of God's goodness and truth and beauty. Some things from the Milky Way, images of that from astronomy, and a good video on fingerprints and galaxies. Again, going back to the John 10:10 project, and another one, Big Universe, Bigger God. I also like the Cristobal Villa, Nature by Numbers and Infinite Patterns. So just to show you that everything is really ordered in powerful mathematical ways as well. That's quite astonishing when we look at the world itself and recognize how great, how vast are his ways. It just becomes utterly astonishing. So those are just some thoughts as we move through this. And I wanted just to see, as we're looking at this together then, what kind of questions you want, or perhaps amplification of some of these things we've been discussing here together. So that's where we are. And then, so what I plan to do then next week is to zoom in and pick up on the series with the book of Job, and go and do that. So let's see what kind of questions you might have about the sequence of these various aspects of wisdom itself.
Ken?
Yes?
I don't have a question, but I just want to thank you. That overview was awesome, and it's really given me a hunger and a desire to continue on with this. I love it.
Thank you. Good. That's wonderful. Thank you for that. That's very kind.
And I might also say, Bill and I, when he was alive, went to the Cove quite a few times. That is the most wonderful place.
Oh, it is. Yes.
And by the way, I'm praying for a sellout.
Oh, thank you for that. I appreciate that very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
No, that'd be lovely. Yeah, thank you for that. So John 10:10. I'm going to thank you for that. That's encouraging. Yeah. I'm going to go to the John 10:10 project, because under here, and we'll pull up here. So I didn't have it lined up here, but and then what we were going to look at here is, I'll show you this super Starling video and just a couple of things. So we're just going to, and my whole intention here then is to stretch your imagination with new insights from science that we didn't know about before. And that's what's going to be fun to do that. So in doing it. So here, I think it is here. Yes. So I'm going to turn this on here.
This is a European starling. Fully grown, it stands 8 inches tall and weighs about 3 ounces. It's a common, ordinary little bird that spends most of the day doing common, ordinary things that hardly anyone notices. Searching for bugs, hanging out with friends, playing in the water, chirping loudly, and taking care of the kids. But at twilight, on winter evenings in Europe and North America, The curtain rises on an incredible performance, and our run-of-the-mill little starling becomes a superstar. From November to March, thousands of starlings congregate an hour before sunset to form enormous flocks that can turn the skies into living works of abstract art. Researchers have proposed multiple theories for this extraordinary behavior. These soaring ballets may be an effort to confuse and drive off predators, or perhaps they're an elaborate means of communication, or just a good way to keep warm. But regardless of their purpose, it is a mesmerizing air show that evokes an obvious question. How do so many birds, flying at speeds of almost 50 miles an hour, avoid collision while maintaining such precision in the air? Recent studies in Italy have produced at least a partial explanation. Scientists photographed portions of a flock from 2 different angles. When processed and studied, this data enabled them to map the specific positions of individual birds. More than 1,300 3D models define the birds' spatial relationships to demonstrate how they interact in the air. This research indicates that individual starlings don't monitor the entire flock. Instead, they calibrate their alignment and velocity to synchronize with the 6 or 7 nearest birds, those to their immediate left, right, and directly in front of them. Each starling seems to follow one simple rule. When your neighbor moves, so do you. As a result, the slightest change of direction by one bird can trigger a chain reaction that ripples throughout the entire flock to generate constant variations in its size and shape. Starlings in flight have been compared to jet fighter pilots who position their aircraft as close as 18 inches, wingtip to wingtip. The pilots don't actually monitor the entire formation. Instead, they rely on a property called topological distancing to track and replicate the precise movements of only the nearest jet. The orchestrated maneuvers of 100,000 starlings are even more demanding. The birds must each detect and respond to the oscillations of the flock in less than 100 milliseconds. That's about 3 times faster than the blink of an eye, and their decision-making is spectacular. This aerial genius isn't the product of trial and error. Instead, the birds' instinctive abilities, programmed into the circuitry of their eyes, brains, and wings, are glorious displays of biological purpose and design, evident even in the lives of creatures we routinely label as ordinary.
It's a wonderful image, isn't it, of the glory of these creatures that can be so extraordinary that you see patterns that just undulate and faster than any human would really be able to respond, as you can see this movement. And you're dealing with something that either works perfectly or not at all. This is not something that there is no developmental pathway, biological developmental pathway by which you could suddenly incrementally develop these capacities. These are things that are actually in the epigenetic information, this instinctual programming that is in these, that is built into them, that transcends any modality or model of any kind of neo-Darwinian synthesis, because it involves something beyond simply the whole idea of DNA. This has to do with epigenetic information. In fact, things that are non-coding, non-adaptive coding, rather. So you see these things, and we look at analogies of humans, and as impressive as that is, it's nothing actually in comparison with the glory of what God does. And it's a lovely thing that we can resonate and respond to it and appreciate that. You see this, I just love this movement back and forth. It's like a work of art. You see that. At one point, it almost looks like a bird. So it's a beautiful thing, is it not? So why do we love such things? Why do we appreciate them? And that's really what it comes down to, is we come to appreciate the glory of God in a way that otherwise would be impossible. And what we now know about people saw them, but we now have a better grasp of what that actually looks like and what that entails. So there's another series I like very much, and it's from Dancing with the Birds, and it's a great series on TV on Netflix, and tempted to show you actually the Netflix video itself and part of it. I'm jumping ahead and so forth, and I may just do that because there's something pretty special about that. So let me see about getting that for you here. So I'm going to try to summon it up real quickly. And if you have any questions or thoughts, so just fire them at me. But I'm summoning up my Netflix right now here. This is a part of a larger series where he's now attracted a possible mate with this 1 meter high bower that he's crafted, one of the most incredible things ever made by an individual creature. It's just an astonishment. And now that she's there, he gives this repertoire of sound, and it's just absolutely astonishing, as you're about to see.
Moving on to other sounds he's picked up from a nearby village, like chopping wood, people talking, and most remarkably, children playing. She's impressed, and who wouldn't be? A final dog bark, and it's on to stage 2.
So that's quite incredible, isn't it? When you see that. So what I go to here is this moment when I first saw this part here. I was astounded. To hear children playing, that was an astonishment. How is such a thing even possible? You see, it's astonishing. It's actually ravishing when you consider what on earth are we beholding. You see, what hath God wrought? And then there's a little segment, and these are just little components here. I'm going to show you this about a lyrebird, and he sings like a chainsaw. You'll actually hear him replicate the sounds. So this is something beyond what you really need to have for mating. This goes way beyond that. This is something gratuitous. This is something elegant, something extraordinary, and we'll see this with others as well. These birds of paradise. That it's so much more than just reproduction. There's something extraordinary going on here, and that you see a whole dance and a whole array of things of this nature. So to play this, listen to this lyrebird then.
He clears a space in the forest to serve as his concert platform. To persuade females to come close and admire his plumes, he sings the most complex song he can manage, and he does that by copying the songs of all the other birds he hears around him, such as the kookaburra. It's a very convincing impersonation. Even the original is fooled. He can imitate the calls of at least 20 different species. He also, in his attempt to outsing his rivals, incorporates other sounds that he hears in the forest. That was a camera shutter. And again. And now a camera with a motor drive. And that's a car alarm. And now the sounds of foresters and their chainsaws working nearby.
That's just far more than anyone needs. It's just an absolute astonishment. So when you see these little moments here, when he's making these sounds, how is this possible then?
And now the sounds of foresters and their chainsaws working nearby.
That kind of a thing is just so beyond comprehension that I find it. How do I respond? And this is where I'm going to leave you. I just showed you just a couple samples, a couple videos that there's so many that we could be looking at together. But what does it teach us about the whole idea about the one who makes all things? To look at his creation, and now we see things that were not seen before. And now is it possible for us to leverage this greater level of understanding in a way that would amplify our appreciation of the living God? So one of the themes that I consistently go back to is this idea of how I can see the created order and use that in a way that helps me appreciate the glory of the living God. So that's what I'd like you to do as well. There's one thing that I showed the group, and I think I ought to go back to that, this puffer fish video, because some of you will not have seen this if you weren't in this my earlier study. So I'm going to just throw that in as one last thing as well. So just a moment here. I'm going to find it for you. So I truly enjoy trying to find these kinds of things that are examples of glorious and great beauty indeed. So here's this pufferfish video here. Yeah, very good. So let's take a look at this.
Unfortunately, this small Japanese pufferfish is dull, almost to the point of invisibility. But to compensate, he is probably nature's greatest artist. To grab a female's attention, he creates something that almost defies belief. His only tools are his fins. In his head, a plan of mathematical perfection. He ploughs the sand, breaking it up into the finest of particles. These shells aren't just rubbish to be removed. He uses them to decorate the ridges of his construction. He can't rest for more than a moment, but must work 24 hours a day for a week, or the current will destroy his creation. A final tidy up, and his masterpiece is complete. Nowhere else in nature does an animal construct something as complex and perfect as this. If this doesn't get him noticed, nothing will.
And then he says, if this doesn't get him noticed, nothing will. And in a strange way, it's almost trivializing this glory that you can see before you. He's using this with his ventral fin. And just all of this, he's just creating with this way. He's not going up there and saying, how's it looking? He doesn't have that vertical perspective. He stays down there the entire time as he creates this marvel of engineering that I find is very reminiscent of a rose window. And so I actually have compared that in some of my illustrations and so forth. If I can find it for you. So I have a little array of these things, and here is the puffer fish. If I can find it, there it is here. So you can see this this glorious beauty that is made, and how does this even begin to become possible? You can see the whole idea of these amazing beauties, and so, like for example, a rose window. I thought maybe it made me think of this. You see, the idea of looking at these rose windows like that. And frankly, there's a very real similarity between this and the nature of the puffer fish itself for the rose windows. So. Let me just go out of here for a moment and put them side by side, and you can see what I mean. So you can see there, and you see this this image here. Pull out of there for a moment here, and go back to him, or another image like this. There's a structure that you can see is a fundamental structure that is all built in. Where does this come from? What does this information come from? And so I actually had quite an experience with the Lord about a month ago, I suppose it was, when I was looking at this. I'm just trying to get rid of this thing here. I had quite an encounter when I was in the shower and just realizing and meditating on some things. And I had just seen this thing perhaps for the first time. And in comparing this glory with this glory here, and realizing you're looking at something that is beyond one's grasp. This fish doesn't know what it's creating. And yet this is something that's an architectural marvel. You see, this is something that we can see cannot be random. But where does that information come from? And so we see again this extraordinary thing that's done to the glory of God. This is far more than just getting a mate. That trivializes it. It tells us about the glory of the mind of the maker. So this was my experience that and I'll leave you with. It was this. When I thought of this image here, it was like God saying, if you can understand how I've created this being, this fish that is able to make such a thing of beauty, if you can understand that, how I put that information, that pattern, that physicality, that instinctual behavior that is beyond our imagination in many ways, then I'll explain to you why you're having trouble today. Not a bad way of looking at it, you see. And the answer, of course, it's like going back to Job. If you can understand the fringe of my ways, Job, then I'll answer your questions, but you can't, and so I won't. And so what you need to do is trust me. You'll never understand me, but you can learn to trust me. And the bigger your vision of who I am, as he speaks to Job, then the greater your capacity then to trust in him. So big God, small problems. Small God, big problems. So I leave you with that.